Hello and welcome to my channel, Haylee Marie Vintage. Today we are doing our annual Pride project. The past few years I feel like I've mostly done gowns for this, but this year I wanted it to go back to my roots of doing day dresses. So I have this beautiful, it's a cotton poly blend fabric that has these really fun rainbows in it. How rainbowy this is, that it's just like kind of rainbowy. I like that it's not, hello, I'm wearing a rainbow, because I love that, don't get me wrong. I mean, I have my hair. But for like a day-to-day dress, sometimes I don't want quite that much color. A lot of my dresses that are that colorful are like dresses that I wear on like my saddest days to like perk me up. But I just kind of want something I can wear every single day. I figured I would go with this cotton poly blend fabric. I got this secondhand by the pound, so it's going to be a pretty affordable project today. And then for our pattern here, I have this very fun pin tucked pattern. I'm going to be doing the sleeveless version, which the sleeveless version actually does have sleeves, but I really like them. So I am going to do this. And this fabric is really gorgeous. You can hopefully tell it's a tiny bit sheer. So my thought also with this fabric is the sheerness will really help emphasize the pin tucks that are going to be in this project, which is always very cool. If you've been on this channel, you know I love a pin tuck. I haven't done too many pin tuck projects on this channel, so this is a good opportunity to do one. And my other thought is because it's sheer, it will allow for more flexibility in this dress, because I can wear a plain, more nude slip and really get the full rainbow, or I have bright purple slips or teal slips. Like, I think I can shift the color of the dress depending on what slip I wear under the dress. So I think that is potentially very exciting. So those are kind of all my thoughts on this project going in. This pattern is my size, so I shouldn't actually have to make any adjustments. Might make the waist an inch bigger, but that's the only thing I can really see myself doing here. Everything else here looks pretty good. And it does button down the back, and then like have the side zipper, and I am not the fan of that. So I will probably be converting the buttons down the back to a zip down the back. And I've been really enjoying making day dresses. I've been enjoying wearing the day dresses that I'm making. So I feel like it's been a very positive experience for me, and I want to continue to just have these really great sewing made pieces, and especially a Pride piece in my everyday wardrobe for the days that I just need to feel a little bit more gay. So I am hoping to get my fabric cut today, but I also have a different video that I need to film, so we'll see how long that one takes. I'm excited for this project, and we're gonna jump straight into cutting this out because, like I said, it should be straightforward and easy. So we are going to cut out this pattern. This is a directional print, both like up, down, side, side, because it starts in rainbow order and does all that good stuff. So I'm making sure to cut my pieces on the direction. I wanted these to go horizontally across my body and not vertically. I just think they'll look better horizontal, and I like them better horizontal. So I'm technically cutting, I think, off grain here, but it will end up with the result that I want, and it's still at least like square. So I think it'll be fine. And then I don't have many adjustments to make to this pattern. Everything measured exactly what I needed it to be, except for I did want an additional 1/2 inch on the waist. I'm trying something a little different. Usually when I need additional on the waist, I take it all the way up into the arm, adding in that extra, but this time I'm going to pivot in. So that way the chest measurement is still the same measurement, because sometimes I get too much bagginess in the back, so I'm hoping this will help solve for the waist while not disrupting the back. But that's all adjustments I make. Otherwise, I'm cutting this out as usual. And the last change I did to this pattern, which again, these were all easy changes, but I did actually go ahead. The back is a button placket, and I don't want a button placket. That's really hard to put on by yourself. I want a back zipper. So I folded my pieces, my pattern pieces for the back bodice to the center back line, and I'm going to cut with that with an additional 5/8 seam allowance so I can put in the zipper there. But I did want to also call that out. So yeah, kind of a lot of changes to this pattern, but I promise they were all super easy. And it's really cool to get to a level of sewing where you can see a pattern like this, you can eyeball the things that you know you won't like, and you can super easily change them. And this is where I usually go into my Patreon spiel, where you can go over and support me there. However, for this month, for Pride Month, it is really important to me to fundraise for vulnerable parts of the queer community. And I, like last year, want to put in a donation to Point of Pride. I am able through my work to double my donation. My work will match my donation to Point of Pride. So I always like to put it out here that if you go over on my Ko-Fi and you put in an amount of money to donate and you mark it Point of Pride, I will will use that through where I work, and I will double that donation for you. And I will send you the receipt with some stuff redacted because I don't need you knowing all of my business. But I will send you a receipt showing you when I donate and how much I donate and all that good stuff. That's one of the really cool benefits of working for the company that I work at, and I like to take advantage of it, and I like to allow everybody to take advantage of it during Pride and raise some money to help trans people get medical care. Before I dived into the skirt pieces though, I did end up cutting out some interfacing. I wanted my sleeves to be nice and crisp and not droopy, so I'm gonna lightly interface that, and I'm also gonna lightly interface the collar. And here's Spooky for the skirt cutting out. She's always so helpful. Because the pattern pieces for the skirt are square, I'm going to cut that more off of measurements than off the actual pattern pieces themselves. And with those, I am actually switching where the side seam sits. So they have the skirt for this, they have the seams sitting at the front bust darts. I want pockets in my skirt, so I want a proper side seam to hide the pockets since this will be a little bit sheer. So I am just using math to get the measurements of what my pieces need to be for the front and the back if I am now moving the sides by quite a few inches. What I'm doing here though is I am putting down my pattern piece mostly to get in the markings for the pin tucks. Otherwise this is just math, and I could just probably math for the pin tucks as well, but I decided to put down the pattern piece and get this marked even though this has already been cut the way I want. But yes, Spooky is always in the mood to help. She's starting to rust. She's getting to be an oldie. Honestly, at this point, I'm just talking to overindulgently give you footage of Spooky trying to tack my scissors. She got a little lecture here. I decided she needed some full-on playtime because animals do these things because they want attention, and that's totally fine. So I was like, I can take a pause in cutting out my fabric and get you some playtime with a mouse while I then can cut the fabric behind your back. As you can see, she's quite a silly little player. But I do know her play patterns enough to do this. If your cat is not as predictable as Spooky, definitely don't have the scissors anywhere near them. It's that I know the way Spooky moves, and so I feel like I can kind of mix the sewing and playing. But yes, know your cat and be careful. But I do, even if she gets in the way, I do so love having her as a silly little assistant. She does let me throw the fabric over her like she is here. I just enjoy this footage a lot. I think it's really fun anytime I'm able to get footage of us playing together. But with me having gotten some of her energy out, I can now actually do all the marking and all the other good stuff I really needed to do at this point. In all my years of interfacing, I've never interfaced something as poorly as I did here. I made two big mistakes here. The first, which I will figure out off camera, is I interfaced the wrong side of one of these sleeves. I didn't feel like pulling it off and salvaging it, so I ended up having to cut another sleeve. This thumbs down right here is exactly when I noticed it. And then I did another goof, more thumbs downs, and I interfaced my towel instead of my collar. So we're not doing great so far. The bodice for this is really interesting because it's actually two separate pieces. So this is kind of like the waist part. I'm putting in those waist darts. I will make the yoke, which is the pin tucked part. But first I'm basically starting by marking all of my darts in all of my different bodice pieces. So I did that waistband piece here, and then here I'll do all the back darts and all of that good stuff. And since I am doing the center zip, I basted that, and then I am pinking it here. I've decided to pink this fabric for my final finish. And here I'm going off script, obviously, because the back thing was a button placket, and now with the zipper, I just have to sew it up and baste it. So easy peasy all the way around. And here I am doing the pin tucks. I am drawing a line between all my marks. I really need to buy a new fabric pen. All of my fabric pens are getting to the point that I can barely see it, but I really like these because they go away so easily with water. You don't even have to really wash the whole thing. You can just spray parts of it with a spray bottle. But yeah, I'm just basically marking straight down these lines. I did realize midway through the project that these lines are not actually straight. They're a little bit curved because they replaced the bust dart. So I did have to adapt a couple things. According to that, I had to unpick and do some adjustments on the pin tucks later. And to sew these pin tucks down, I am stitching from what I know will be the top of the pin tuck. So the part of the stitching you will see. That way that's the top stitching, the nicer stitching, and I can see how well we're paralleling and how well it looks overall, because the bottom will be in that crease of that pin tuck and you won't really see it. And then the other thing compensating looking for that bust dart is also the way that you attach the waist part to the yoke part. There's a slight curve here that's going to allow for, again, that dart, which is not a dart, but is just like a flat pattern lay. But this was just something I hadn't really thought about until I was all of a sudden doing it and doing the easing and all of that good stuff. So a really neat feature, and one that I didn't expect. I didn't expect this pattern to feel so unconventional in certain ways on the bodice. And after sewing this down, I did have a little bit of a wrinkle, and I didn't end up fixing it because it's hidden by the pin tuck. This is a good example of when I choose not to unpick and not choose to fix the thing in the moment, because I know down the line, in fact, I had already forgotten about that little tuck until I was watching this footage. It's not a big deal to me, and it wouldn't bother me as much as like sometimes when I get small tucks in other places. And then with the front and back fully assembled, I am sewing together the shoulders as well as the side seams. And again, I will be pinking these for the seam finish. Next up is the collar. I have already stitched this together, and I am now just clipping my seam pretty close to the collar. This will just help me turn it pretty easily. I have learned that I prefer clipping closer as opposed to clipping inward. Sometimes I do a combo of both, which is what I'm doing today, but in general, if you clip your seam really close, you can maybe get away without clipping it in the way I'm doing here. Right now, I'm just kind of figuring out what works best for me and what works best for some fabrics, and with this being a fine fabric that you're going to be able to see through, like you'll be able to see the pressed seam inside. This is the like two-prong combo thing that I'm trying. And then I'm just pressing it out. I will say I've just gotten so much better at turning and pressing things. I think it's a practice thing, but I've definitely noticed that things just like turn and press nicer for me recently. And it's not that they're doing that, it's I'm doing all the prep work that makes it a lot easier to make these things look nicer. And then I am pinning that to the neckline, and I am going to just baste the collar on for now. And then I am going to focus on the sleeves. So they basically just have you press it in half. And then I will baste the edges of this, which will also give me what I need to ease the sleeve. So it's a good 2-for-1, I guess. And here I am just easing that sleeve in. These sleeves are so cool. I really, really like these. And they were so easy to make. I just had to fold them in half. I didn't have to hem or construct or do anything wild. And here I'm actually stitching that sleeve in. I've taken off the like table part of my sewing machine, and I'm using just my little sleeve thing. This is pretty easy to do here because these sleeves are essentially sleeveless sleeves. Like they're just more of a detail than like a sleeve. And then I'm going to finish the seam with a seam binding tape. This is like a little rayon seam binding tape I have in my stash. So what I'm going to do first is I'll sew one side, and then I will cut down the edges, and then I will sew the other side. So that way my seam is extra finished there. I like to not just have a pinked seam in the armpit, especially when you're looking at something where the sleeve for this is so short. There is a chance that like it could like pop out if you don't take your time in finishing that. And I don't want anybody to see my unfinished sleeve edge just like poking out of my armpit. And with most sleeves, I don't go back and press my sleeve like this. But again, I want to make sure that the seam isn't popping out of the sleeve all the time, so I'm going to give it a really nice press here. And then the next thing I need is some bias tape. I was going back and forth between doing matching like white bias tape to the seam binding that I used, or if I wanted to match the dress, and I decided I love this fabric enough that I want it to match the dress. So I'm going to cut some bias binding out of this, and then I will have to piece them together because I don't have long enough scrap to get the whole neckline in one go. I also think it's always good for me to practice making my own bias binding anytime I can, because usually it is my preferred finish, but also as I've started to delve more into some 1930s patterns, it's really important I get a lot better at making bias binding out of the fabric. So yeah, this was a, I guess, good skill to pick back up. And then here I am attaching the bias binding to the neckline. That will secure the collar, finish the neckline all in one go. But that is all I'm going to do for the night. I am done for the day, all as if I didn't do a whole lot today. I was super surprised at how quick this dress felt like it was coming together. I thought it was going to be a little bit more complex, but I felt like I was just kind of cruising. Alrighty, I found no good stopping point in the middle of my project to hand sew, so I'm going to hand sew and talk to you about media on a different project that is a not on camera project, just because I did have media I wanted to talk about. I finished a few series, so I did finish the Ugly series, and I'm going to talk about that in a second after I real quick talk about it. I also reread the full Hunger Games series, the original 3. I didn't reread the one about President Snow because it's not particularly one that I love or enjoy. Didn't read that one, but I reread reread the original 3, and man, that trio is even more devastating once you have read Haymitch's games. It makes me very curious about her process, which I know there's plenty of interviews and I can go probably out and read it, of like how much she knew about Haymitch's games when she wrote the books, or did she take what she wrote in the Performer books and apply it retro? Like, I'm very curious, right? They fit together so well, and so much about like Haymitch's characterization in the original books is so clearly underlined by then the later book. And so I'm very curious about her writing process, and I truly think The Hunger Games is a young adult series that is like incredibly nuanced and deep in its like allegory and the different things it makes you think about. I think they're truly like a great work of fiction, even though I know they're young adult and people like to take young adult literature a little bit less seriously. And if you haven't ever given them a read, I would recommend it. While I think the movies are great adaptations of it, they're nowhere near as good and in depth of the books, and also they're definitely a little bit more, I guess, PG-13 than the books, because some of the stuff that happens in the books, they probably cut from the movies to try to keep under that R rating. I don't know. I feel like I cried through all those books, but yeah, no, super well done. I always cry at the end, at the very, very, very end when the cat comes back. No matter how much I steel myself for that moment, I always cry. And also it's good because I am trying some different medication, and I've been concerned that I won't be able to cry when I consume media that would normally make me cry, and I have indeed been able to cry. So we're happy here. Now going back to Ugly. So I did finish the Ugly series. First, very enjoyable series. I enjoyed reading it. All of my critique of it is not that I thought it was a bad series. I just think after reading The Hunger Games, it's definitely for a slightly younger audience than I think Hunger Games, but also to me, it lacks a whole lot of depth in concepts overall. And in my opinion, the 4th book, Extras, I think that's the 4th one, it should have never been written. The author should have ended it at the 3rd book. The 3rd book I thought gave like the perfect open book ending, and taking it into the 4th book into just like a really different world. And also like I think there was appropriation of Japanese culture in it in a not so great way. And also I just, aside from that, thought the plot and everything wasn't very good there. So I do wish he had just stopped it at the 3rd book. Even though in some ways the 3rd book did have like not the most like wrapped up ending, I am working on making my peace with non-wrapped up endings now that I'm back to reading. A lot of books have less like completely wrapped up endings than I feel like the probably like level of movie I have been watching recently, which is funny because I'm about to talk about a movie that has the opposite of a wrapped up ending. I think the 4th book shouldn't have been written, shouldn't have existed, and I wish I hadn't read it. Again, all that critique, I still enjoyed them. I just thought, especially after I finished them before I read the Hunger Games book, and then I read the Hunger Games books right after, and I'm like, wow, the book, the Ugly series just definitely feels a lot more shallow after you read Hunger Games. And again, there's nothing wrong with that. I think audience is slightly different. I think whatever, it's just, it was very, very apparent when I was reading both. And then the books that I'm reading right now, I am reading the Wicked Lovely series, which is a 4-book series by Melissa Marr. They're like a dark fairy book. They're very like Holly Black's books. If you ever read the Ironside series, and caveat, I haven't reread it in 5 years, but the Ironside series was my favorite series of books growing up. I reread them at least twice every year, and this is very essenced like that. I would say like similar writing style, similar protagonist age, so you know, they're all in their teens. I am hoping to eventually stumble upon some more adult fairy books, but I stumbled upon this because right now, for Pride, I actually wanted to talk more about queer authors, but I had a big list of queer fantasy I wanted to read, and I went to check it out from the library, and all of them had wait lists of at least 11 weeks. So Pride will be coming to you all the rest of this year with a bunch of sapphic fairy fantasy series, but not this month, ironically, for Pride, but because this appears to be her straight series. She had another series called Out, I believe, for being more sapphic, but again, it had a long wait list. That's how I ended up on her name in general and her topic. I'm thoroughly enjoying them. They're really fun escapism. They don't feel anything like this world. They don't really feel relevant. I mean, there's like slight allusions to climate change, but only sort of, kind of. I'm only in book 3. I'm in about the middle of book 3 right now, so I don't know how the series end, and I don't know my final thoughts on it, other than I will say, yes, if you like Holly Black, if you liked Ironside and that whole fairy series that she did, you would definitely probably enjoy this series. Again, probably young adult, I would argue. I love young adult fiction. I don't know, I feel like there's people who get weird about adults who love young adult fiction, but sometimes it's nice. I think I like kind of sometimes the more straightforward presentation it tends to have. I truly really enjoy young adult, and I think it is totally okay to be a grown-ass grown-ass adult who loves young adult novels. But that is everything I'm reading right now. And then this weekend I watched Picnic at Hanging Rock, which is like an Australian new wave film from the 70s. It's a very classic film. I had never seen it before. I had stumbled across a TikTok slideshow that talked about like very just aesthetic movies. And if there's one thing that can get me through a movie, it's aesthetics. And they had about 8 movies on that list, and only 2 are currently streaming on like platforms I already have. Picnic at Hanging Rock. I keep wanting to say Hanging Lake because that's a lake in Colorado that I hiked to a bunch when I was growing up. Picnic at Hanging Rock. Really interesting movie. Talk about an open ending. If you are somebody who needs a closed ending with a bunch of answers, this is not the movie for you. Hopefully that's not too spoilery. Like I said, it was on a list of very aesthetic movies, and aesthetic it was. It was a gorgeous film. I watched the whole thing and I actually pretty much barely picked up my screens, which I have talked about how sometimes I have a hard time watching movies without rolling on my phone. And once I finished it, I felt like I was like coming out of like a fever dream. It was just a very atmospheric movie. This movie, I would say though, is mostly vibes. There is a plot, sort of, but I would say it was mostly vibes. And I would actually say normally I'm a plot-driven movie watcher. In this case, I really enjoyed the vibes because it was gorgeous. Let's see, Spooky's facing off with a squirrel. Let's see if we can get that. Can you see her? Can you see the squirrel? Yeah. This squirrel has been coming up on the porch and taunting Spooky incessantly lately. Unfortunately, you're quite blocked in view. Sorry about that, because I know we all love Spooky here. But gorgeous film, definitely a bunch of underlying sexuality themes. It feels like there's at least 3 queer-coded relationships in this movie, but nothing is ever explicitly queer, so could be reading into it. I mean, I think it's like very intentionally amped up. I think when you set a movie in the 1900s and it's about girls and to me very much about like the sensuality and sexuality of young girls, which is weird when you say it that way. I really didn't like that's not what I said, but I can't say that that's not what the movie's about. It's definitely like, it's about teenage girls. Like, let's be clear, we're not talking like children. Anyone under 18 is a child. Beautiful aesthetics, lots of like those white lawn lacy dresses and beautiful landscapes. It was a really, really fun watch aesthetically. For me, I'm working on becoming more comfortable with an open ending, but this was definitely still much too open-ended for me personally. I definitely like a little bit more of a closed ending movie than how open this movie was. I think open-ended is the way a lot of things are left, and reasonably so. And apparently the book has a final chapter, which I have not read the book, disclaimer I guess, and I will probably never read the book. We'll see if I change my mind, because I also saw that Amazon had put out a 6-episode series of this book as well. So I am debating watching that. We'll see. I haven't really been in a fiction-y mood on that. But yeah, if you love beautiful movies, I do recommend it. And the fact that it is available on HBO makes it very accessible, because there's a lot of movies that are not as accessible. But like, I feel like recently when I've gotten older movies recommended to me, I can't even find anywhere that it's not like $4 to just watch the movie. So like, I do usually consider if it's part of a subscription a little bit more accessible than buying the movie one-off or renting it one-off. Oh, and then outside of that, I'm still on my Survivor reality TV nonsense, and I've added the current season of Love Island to my roster, which is so much of a time commitment. I haven't watched Love Island US actually ever. I binge watched a ton of Love Island UK during the early parts of the pandemic, back when I lived with a roommate. So yeah, I have been watching Love Island, been enjoying it. It's really fun. I've never watched the show live while the show's playing, so I've never been able to vote and do all that stuff. So it's been fun. And then I am currently also still working on my Survivor rewatch. I was just gonna watch select seasons, but just due to Survivor 50 coming around the corner, which has a ton of past players on it, as well as Traders coming up that has several survivors on it, I've just decided to commit to the bit and watch all 50 seasons. I've watched probably about 14 at this point, but right now I'm going sequentially. So I am actually in season 3 right now. I just finished season 3 last night. What a tough season to watch. Woof. I watched it just like in the background while like I sewed. Actually, I sewed a lot of this shirt while watching it. But with that, we're gonna hop back into the making of this dress. Excited to show you how it turns out. I am in my slip today, so scandy, because I actually wore it to work today. So I already know how I feel about it, and we're gonna get back back to me actually making it. So we're gonna go back in time real quick. And now it's time to focus on the skirt. First thing I'm gonna do is sew up the back seam with the top of it being basted so I can eventually slip the zipper in. And of course I am pressing my seams open, pinking them, all of that good stuff. And then I am stacking up where all of the pockets are gonna go on the side seams. So that way I can just cut once and cut the marks that I need for the pocket to know where exactly I need to place them on these side seams. And then I will pin the pocket to the skirt panels and I will sew them first down right here on the side seam with a 3/8 inch allowance. Since the rest of the allowance is a 5/8, this will help the pocket seam kind of like disappear into the seamception, if you will. And I did pink these bits of seams and then I am going to press them open. I like to not have a ton of fraying fabric around the pocket, especially on something so sheer like this, where people will likely see if this starts to fray because they'll be able to see through the seams. And then I'm going to be pinning my side seam and have pockets and all. Once that was done, I did my first pin tuck off camera just to get the lay of the land, if you will. And now I'm doing the marking for the pin tuck. I ideally would have loved to not be sewing pin tucks with everything sewed together and all this fabric, but of course for the pin tuck to go around all the way and like not fall off weird in the seams, you have to do it after you get the skirt completely assembled. So I'm doing it now. And again, my fading markers are slowly killing me because I can barely see the lines I'm drawing. Spooky stretch off the sewing machine and onto the ironing board. But I'm taking those lines and pinning them together. Again, I'm going to plan to top stitch from the top of the pin tuck and not the part that is pleated under, just like I did in the bodice, which is what I'm doing here. This helps me keep aligned just in general because I can see where all my different things are. I don't know, this is just the way I like to go from the top rather than the bottom. I'm sure you can do it either way. I don't know what's technically correct. And then once I got all of these pin tucked, I pressed them at the same time. For the bodice, I pressed each one after I finished sewing it. But here I pressed all three together because they just align a little bit better on the skirt. And the skirt, it doesn't matter as much for the shaping as it did for the bodice. Here they're more of like a cool detail versus on the bodice they were also my dart, right? And once I've seen the pin tucks and seen how long the skirt is, I now feel safe to finish the hem edge. I'm doing that before I attach the bodice just because this is usually the way I prefer to do things, is with less fabric and without the bodice attached. And I also think it will be nice because the pin tucks are kind of like these stripes that are across the body because of the fact this fabric is a little sheer. So I think it will also be nice if I have a fairly deep hem to kind of add almost like another interest stripe at the bottom. So I had gathered the selvage edge of this and I wish I switched this and I had cut this edge because as you can see, because it had the selvage and those are like denser woven things, it made for this like weird curlicue waist effect, which I knew was gonna impact me sensory wise on the inside of the garment. So I'm not gonna do that again. And then next time I do anything like this, the selvage will be the bottom where I can hem it because I like having that extra structure in the hem, and having it all gathered into the waist like this was wild and not the way I would do it again. As always, I did pull out all of my gathering stitches. I was a little bit worried about this dress. If you've been on this channel a really long time, which means you saw me sew, I think my first dress or my second dress, I was worried about what I call the trash bag gather effect, which is gathers that just can like start to look kind of more like you're wearing a trash bag that's draped around your body than something gathered. And the selvage part of this being up top was also like affecting how even the gathers looked, which is interesting. So I did end up pinking them and cutting them off, which is not my preference at all usually for a waist because I don't like to clip very close to the waist in general. But I was feeling weird about the whole thing and I knew I was going to continue to feel weird, so I just did the chop and sucked it up. I somehow missed the footage of me putting in the zipper. You can see Spooky's shadow here actually. She's sitting in the window while I am working on this hem. I ended up hemming this I think like 4 inches, which is a super wide hem, but again because the sheerness, I kind of wanted that really thick stripe effect at the bottom of the skirt. And Spooky truly was like, I know that you're the gay one, but I need to be the star of the video. So she was very snuggly. I sat down to hand sew and she just like sunk into me. It's really cute. I don't know. I feel like I got a lot of really cute footage of Spooky this round. I appreciate her. This is, I guess, a Spooky appreciation video too. I mean, She just clearly loves me, and I really appreciate that. But here I am actually doing some hand sewing. I am sewing the hem with a slip stitch. And Spooky is of course still present while I sew in my label and sew down some of the bindings and different things that just need that last hand sewing touch, but mostly the label here. I love sewing my label, especially in something that I'm proud of, and I am excited to show you the reveal for this one, so let's hop to it. Alright, you have seen the reveal. I hope you enjoyed it. I am going to, like usual, break down thoughts and then hope helps. But first, before I get into that, I just want to again plug that if you go over to my Ko-Fi, you can send me money to mark it for Point of Pride, and I can double your contribution using a benefit I have at my job, and we can help provide healthcare for trans folk who cannot afford it. Really, really important cause, and during Pride it is really important we do not forget about our trans siblings and make sure that they are taken care of, especially in a nation that is so pitted against them right now. I think it's extra important to be centering trans people in your thoughts about Pride. But now we're going to pivot over to the budget. This dress was cheap because I bought the fabric by the pound, so the fabric was only $1.88, so it's not very heavy. Notions, this would be thread, zipper, labels, interfacing, binding, all that good stuff, $6.22. And then the pattern itself was $5. I picked this one up probably at an antique mall. That brought me to a dress total of $13.10, which is bonkers. I can't believe how little this cost, honestly. It's pretty wild to me because I think it doesn't look like a cheap dress at all. I do want to show you guys that you can sew affordably. I do have obviously my projects where I use my really nice fabrics, like the one I'm wearing right now, but you can make really cute stuff at really affordable prices as long as you can find your access to your secondhand materials, which is even better for the environment. On this channel, we do talk about labor, and this dress took me 9 hours and 45 minutes to make, so definitely a little bit longer than your normal dress, which makes sense. It has all the pin tucks, which added a lot to like order of operations and things to figure out. Plus I had a directional print, which makes cutting take longer and all that good stuff. I'm still happy with that, and we talk about a living wage here on this channel. I live in Seattle, so I use Seattle's living wage of $35.39. If you multiply that by my 9 hours and 45 minutes, you get $345.05 of the labor it took me to make this dress, which means for me to make all of my money back and my time back, I would have to sell this dress at $358.15. Of course, this is not a one-to-one on how you would do a factory because you would have stations and there are certain things that can be a little bit more automatic, but every garment is made with human hands and it's really, really important to remember that. I feel like companies so badly want you to forget that a human works on your garment, and you should really think about how much that worker is being paid if a garment costs really, really little money. As always, I did some research. It was really hard to find much comparable to this though, honestly, you guys. Pin tucks does not not seem to be a popular feature in clothing today, especially pin tucks used kind of in the way this is to shape the bodice. So I just like did my best to find my estimates. So I tried to find things that had at least 6 pin tucks to compare, because that would be a similar level of complicated, but it was really hard to find anything that anywhere near matched this in terms of what it would take to make it. I think one of the reasons is this was an incredibly labor intensive, kind of hard to fit garment, and I can see why mass producers would not be super into that. So the closest thing I found at the fast fashion price, this is your for sure incredibly unethical labor, was $27, and I am proud to say I beat that by half. Mid, this is your mall brands, this is your Madewell, your Anthropologies. While they are more expensive, they still often are not paying their garment workers a fair wage at all, and they often are still exploiting their workers. So at that price point, I found something around $258. Honestly, it was a lot easier to find things in the designer price range, which isn't something I usually compare, but the closest thing I found was by a designer brand at $558, which when you look at my cost with my labor sort of makes sense. Although again, just because something is designer, like fashion house designer, doesn't mean it's made ethically. You always have to watch. And I did find something kind of close in slow fashion at $320. I don't know, I can't believe how cheap mine was to make compared to if I bought it in the slow fashion. I always say I don't save money sewing my own clothes because I have access to fast fashion, but I do save not exploiting people essentially, and I save money doing that because to buy these slow fashion brands, they are usually pretty expensive. And then I do like to do a vintage comparison because vintage is the closest thing to what I'm sewing. I found only a vaguely similar vintage dress for $68 comparably. I look on Etsy because it lets you mass search so much easier. I do think if I was able to search like individual vendor sites super easily, this dress would be a lot more expensive if you're looking at a like higher end vendor, which I think is who would be selling a dress like this. But yeah, that basically sums up all the different things around cost. I'm pretty pleased, like I said, with the price of this. Sewing is truly a tool that enables and empowers me to be able to not participate in the fast fashion machine. But here is the dress, and I have to say, I think this is some of my best work. The pin tucks are not perfectly even. I unpicked one of the pin tucks on the bodice a couple times to try to get it even with the other side. I will say, yes, things are not perfectly even. This is not a perfect make by any means, but I think the way I did the collar is really clean and gorgeous. I'm really proud of this collar. I think it is one of the best collars I've ever done, and I think the sleeve job was really good. I just think I did an excellent job overall with the craftsmanship of this. I'm really quite pleased with it. I will say fit could be a little looser, but that's okay. I tried it on for the first time when I was pretty bloated and it was not comfortable, but then I wore it for my work day and it was really comfortable all work day, and I didn't even think about it until I got bloated again in the evening, which is kind of how my body works. So I am mostly happy with the fit, but yes, I think I could have put in just another ½ inch and it would have been a little bit better. I also think it's exacerbated. This zipper is kind of sticky and I think I need to decide if I redo it, but I think I did a really good job on the zipper, and that's not always a place that I think I do the best job on. So I don't see myself replacing the zipper anytime soon. But yeah, I'm pleased. I think it's really cute. I think my theory around kind of like playing with the sheerness of this worked really well. While you don't necessarily see the color through the dress as much as I had hoped, you do very much see the pin tucks and the hem, and like I even like how like the sleeves and the collar are also less sheer because of the interfacing. I think the mild play this has with sheerness is really successful, and it definitely has me thinking about potentially future sheer fabric opportunities, because like I don't really want to sew with a chiffon, but like you could in theory, and I think it would be really cool in a pattern like this because again you would see everything. I'm really proud of this project and I'm really excited about it, and I'm excited to wear it for all of my Pride adventures this year. Speaking of Pride, we're gonna hop over to Hope Corner. I had so many thoughts on Hope Corner this time because I wanted to keep it Pride themed in some ways, but also the No Kings protest just happened and I found a lot of activity around that pretty inspiring. We're not going to keep it as Pride focused, but I do want to address the things that keep me hopeful about Pride. I love being able to have a month to just really celebrate and learn things. I always feel like I learn new queer history during Pride. Pride Month is just a very nice month because There's a lot of reasons to connect with my community. There's a lot of events for me to go to that are actually catered for me, and it's really, really nice, and I really deeply appreciate that. I appreciate also Pride Month helps raise a lot of funds, again, for places like Point of Pride that help support queer folk. Pride always gives me a lot of joy. I have kind of Pride things scattered throughout the month, and even things that aren't Pride events, I feel like there's just a little extra joy in the queer community during Pride if you stay offline. I will say the discourse online around Pride this year has been really disheartening, and I would really encourage, if you've been disheartened by what you've been seeing on TikTok as all the discourse and kind of the infighting, go to an in-person Pride thing, go touch some grass, go connect with your fellow queer community, get offline, because right now what's going around online is really negative, but I promise you will let go of a lot of those negative feelings if you go somewhere in person. I think that is so true for a lot of reasons. Which brings me to, I wanted to talk about the King's Rally and other ICE protests. God, obviously it's been rough out here. Watching LA go through something that feels very similar to what Seattle went through in 2020, I just like, my heart really goes out to LA because there's so much like twisting of narrative, and like what I will tell you is, to this day, I still regularly have people in my life try to tell me what happened in Seattle during 2020, and I can say I was at those protests, I attended those things, and I did not see that kind of behavior, or when I did, it was incredibly isolated, and they will still try to tell me how violent it all was. So if you're in LA, if you're in these protests and you're feeling really frustrated, I just want to say that like I see you and I hear you, and I'm really sorry. Yeah, I know what it was like to have your community just attacked like that, and what it's like to like have police attack protesters so heavily and with so many like really scary weapons, and they use them against what even their training says. I knew someone in Seattle who was hit with a rubber bullet, and it has impacted the rest of their life, and they were peaceful. I've had friends go through being arrested. Like, I just want to say I really see you and I hear you, and I'm really sorry for what your community is experiencing, and the fact that you're experiencing this at a time where you're also having community members kidnapped and ripped from your hands. And I'm really sorry, but I will say the actions I've seen people take for immigrants has made me feel very heartened. In Seattle, I'll speak to like what's happening locally, and I encourage you to look at what's happening locally for you as well, because I truly think local politics is what is going to sustain us at the end of the day, because it's what's going to give us that connection in that community. I've been very heartened. Seattle has made it hard. So we had ICE workers taking and kidnapping immigrants right after their court cases in the courthouse, and in the recent weeks, protesters have made it so ICE can't get the immigrants out of the building by blocking all of the exits with their vans, with like bikes and different things and blockades. And it has made it so ICE is now no longer lurking in those courthouses. And I've seen a lot of movements around people, like there's shifts to basically check and make sure people who enter the courthouse also leave the courthouse. And I think seeing that community action is so cool and makes me so hopeful. And like, I truly believe there's a role for everybody in protest. I don't go to protests in person because of my health, and in general, I'm not great with crowds, so it's not particularly safe or effective for me to be at a protest, but I am checking in on people. There's so many roles you can take in resistance. Another thing that I saw is they did a similar thing with the ICE detention center in Tukwila. Again, protesters rallied around, and we do know as a result of those protesters that 2 people did not check back in, and we don't know where they're located. And that's really sad and scary. At least 2. There's mixed reports between 2 and 5. Seeing communities show up in such a clear way has been really, really hopeful and makes me feel really hopeful, and that's where we'll go to the No Kings rally or marches or protests. I don't know exactly what the language they want to use. I see so much hope in that. Right now, the numbers are estimating about 13 million people turned out. Hopefully you've seen this number around on the internet, but it only takes 3.5% of the population being active to stop a dictatorship, and I think that's really encouraging, that 13 million people, if you guys can stay active, we can stop this thing, right? I've seen, again, a lot of discourse with a lot of criticism about the protest. I also have criticism I have about the protesting. Yes, I personally, if I'm going to show up at a protest, it is going to have a direct call. Like for No Kings The No Kings protest for me was a little bit ambiguous. When I was more active in protesting, a lot of times it was around like Muslim bans of the travel bans in America and like just like a lot clearer call to actions. However, that said, again, so many people showed up, and I'm gonna let my marketing nerd out for a little bit, or like my real life adult job out for a minute. And like what I think is really hopeful about the No Kings rallies is it helps people start to enter the being active funnel. It really helps people plug into community to see people in person. There's also a lot of joy in seeing so many people in person show up and rally. And in the places in the country where there's not a ton of people, I was reading about protests that were like 5 or 6 people. It helped sometimes those 5 or 6 people meet each other. And building those grassroots community is what matters. And I think this protest allowed for that. I will try to find them. There are a lot of links floating around on how you can continue to take action on top of just that protest. And I would encourage you to check that out. Back to like the marketing nerding that I was going to talk about. So like when you're talking about a sales funnel, which is what I talk about all day, every day, and it's really boring. But when you talk about sales funnels, you have like first touch to taking someone down the funnel to eventually like buy. And like I see protests as No Kings as like that top of that sales funnel. And that sales funnel isn't to sell you something, but it's to get you connected and active in your community and protecting and safekeeping your community. So I see the No Kings protest as people's enter, and the entry is sometimes the hardest part to get. And once people enter the funnel, it's easier to like draw them down into the funnel, which would be just various activist groups and communities that exist. And I think the No Kings protest was really important because I think for a lot of people it was their first protest. Like I know my first experience protesting is a very critiquable protest. My first time protesting was the Women's March. I believe it was the first month of Trump's inauguration. But that was my first introduction into protesting, and that helped me become more active in my community around protesting, around mutual aid. It was my touch point that eventually like brought me in to doing what I do, including what I do here. It was my entry point for all of the activism I do around community building and mending and sewing. Like it was my touch point in back then, and I think it's really important to meet people where they're at. And when you know tons of people are going to show up, or when you know these small groups of people are going to pop up in your small town, that's just a lot easier to meet and meet at than finding a lot of these groups are hard to find because they don't have the resources that like big meetup corporation and like corporate and event planning run things do. They're all scrappy and they're grassroots. I think marches like No Kings is really important for that, and I felt really inspired seeing that many people show up. And I believe in this country, which sounds wild given this country's history. Very, very much a problem, but like I believe in us. I wouldn't do any of the work I did if I didn't believe in us. Like I wouldn't be here if I didn't believe in us as a country and us as people. I feel like I talk a lot of this lot in my travel vlogs. It's like I truly believe in the connection and like similarity of humans across the board. Like I truly believe that's the strongest thing out there, and it's really easy to not see that because the people who gravitate towards power are the people who lack that level of humanity in a lot of cases, not all cases, but in a lot of cases. And so I think it's really easy to get lost in seeing what the few powerful are doing and forgetting about the many of us and what we're doing. And I think the No Kings March was a very good indication of what the many of us are. So that's my little spiel. Happy Pride. Again, I will have my Ko-fi down below. That's the only thing I'm linking on this video. And yeah, just say like just comment point of pride, and I will send you those receipts later. I'll probably wait a couple weeks till this video goes out to make sure it all goes in one bunch, because my process through my job to double my donation it just takes a little bit of time. So I don't want to do it a bunch of times, but yes, I am really excited. Read about their mission, read about the trans people they've given care to. This is also my last video for a month, so I will see you back in August. I'm still filming most of July. I'm not really taking a break. I'm more just getting ahead of content for the fall that I'm going to have, which is going to be pretty crazy, both work-wise and in my personal life. So I'm trying to use my July off to prep so you guys can have some content. I will see you in a month. Take good care of yourself. Go find things that give you hope, and please go and connect in your local communities. That is going to be what is going to help you the most. Bye!